I've owned dogs my entire life, but Rex was different. For 8 years, my Border Collie had been the epitome of canine perfection on our small farm in rural Kentucky. Every morning at dawn, he'd sit patiently by the kitchen door, waiting for me to finish my coffee before we'd make our rounds together. Rex knew our routine better than I did. He'd check the chicken coop first, then the barn where our 3 horses spent their nights, and finally, the perimeter fence that kept our small herd of cattle contained. Never once did he chase the chickens or spook the horses. He was calm, intelligent, and utterly reliable. That's why what happened on that sweltering July morning caught me so completely off guard. I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through weather reports on my phone, when I heard the first whine. It was soft, almost apologetic, coming from somewhere near the back door. Rex rarely made unnecessary noise, so I looked up, expecting to see him waiting politely as usual. Instead, I found him pacing in tight circles, his black and white coat damp with sweat despite the early hour. His ears were pinned back against his head, and his brown eyes held an expression I'd never seen before, something between panic and determination. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, setting down my phone. Rex stopped pacing and stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For the first time in 8 years, my perfect dog looked absolutely wild. The strange behavior escalated throughout the morning. Rex refused his breakfast, something that had never happened in his entire life. He was a Border Collie who lived for routine, and breakfast at 7:30 was sacred. Yet there sat his untouched bowl while he continued his frantic pacing. I tried calling him outside for our usual rounds, but he wouldn't budge from the kitchen. Instead, he kept running to the back window, standing on his hind legs to peer out toward the fields behind our property. Every few minutes, he'd let out a low, mournful howl that sent chills down my spine. "Rex, come here," I commanded, using the firm tone that had always worked before. He ignored me completely. This was unprecedented. Rex had been trained since puppyhood to respond to basic commands, and his obedience had never wavered. Now he acted as if I didn't exist, consumed by whatever was driving his bizarre behavior. By noon, I was genuinely worried. Rex had been panting heavily for hours, his tongue hanging out as if he'd been running marathons. He'd scratched deep gouges in the hardwood floor near the back door, and his whining had become almost constant. I called Dr. Martinez, our veterinarian, describing Rex's symptoms. She suggested heat stroke or possibly poisoning, recommending I bring him in immediately. But when I approached Rex with his leash, he backed away, growling softly. Another first in our 8 years together. Something was terribly wrong with my dog, and I had no idea what. Dr. Martinez's examination revealed nothing physically wrong with Rex. His temperature was slightly elevated, but not dangerously so. Blood work came back normal. Neurologically, he seemed fine, though she noted his extreme agitation and recommended sedatives. "Sometimes dogs develop anxiety disorders," she explained, preparing a mild tranquilizer. "It's more common than you'd think, especially in highly intelligent breeds like Border Collies." The sedative helped temporarily. Rex calmed down enough for me to get him home, where he immediately collapsed on his bed and slept for several hours. I hoped whatever episode he'd experienced was over. I was wrong. Rex woke up around sunset more agitated than before. This time, instead of pacing, he ran straight to the back door and began clawing at it with desperate intensity. His nails scraped against the wood as he whined and barked, a sound filled with such urgency that I felt compelled to let him out. The moment I opened the door, Rex bolted toward the back of our property. I followed, jogging to keep up as he raced through our pasture toward the old cornfield that bordered our land. The cornfield had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since old Mr. Henderson died and his family sold the farm to developers who never followed through. What remained was a tangle of volunteer cornstalks, weeds and brambles that I'd been meaning to clear but never found time for. Rex stopped at the edge of the field, his entire body trembling as he stared into the overgrown maze of dead and dying plants. 3 weeks earlier, that same cornfield had caught fire. I'd been awakened at 2 in the morning by the sound of sirens and the acrid smell of smoke. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, nearly half the field was engulfed in flames that reached 20 feet into the night sky. The fire chief, a man named Bobby Walsh, whom I'd known since high school, told me they suspected arson. The blaze had started in 3 separate locations simultaneously, and there was evidence of accelerant use. But with no witnesses and limited resources for investigation, the case went nowhere. The fire had burned for 6 hours before they got it under control. What remained was a blackened scar across the landscape, a patch of charred earth that stood out like a wound against the green Kentucky countryside. Standing there with Rex as he trembled and whined at the field's edge, I remembered how he'd reacted that night. While I'd stood on our back porch watching the flames, Rex had cowered inside the house, hiding under the kitchen table. I'd assumed he was afraid of the noise and chaos. Now, looking at his behavior, I wondered if there was more to it. Rex suddenly lunged forward, not into the burned section, but toward the area where the fire had started, the section that had been cleared and was beginning to show new growth. He stopped about 10 feet into the field and began digging frantically, his paws throwing dirt and ash in all directions. "Rex, no!" I called, but he ignored me completely. I had to physically grab Rex's collar to stop his frantic digging. His paws were black with ash and soil, and he'd managed to excavate a hole nearly 2 feet deep in the soft earth. As I pulled him back, something caught the fading sunlight, a glint of metal buried in the dirt. My heart rate quickened as I knelt down and carefully brushed away more soil. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. It was a metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, partially melted and warped from intense heat. The fire had clearly reached this spot, but somehow the box had survived, buried just deep enough to avoid complete destruction. Rex sat beside me, finally calm for the first time all day, watching as I carefully lifted the damaged container from its earthen grave. The metal was still warm to the touch, though that could have been from the day's heat. The lid was partially fused shut, but I could see gaps where the fire had warped the edges. "What did you find, boy?" I whispered, more to myself than to Rex. He responded with a single soft bark, the first normal sound he'd made since morning. I looked around the empty field, suddenly aware of how isolated we were. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and the sun was setting rapidly. Whatever was in this box, Rex had been desperate for me to find it. His strange behavior hadn't been madness at all, it had been purpose. With the metal box tucked under my arm and Rex walking calmly beside me for the first time all day, we headed back to the house. I had no idea what I was about to discover. Back in my kitchen, I set the warped metal box on the table and examined it more carefully. The heat damage was extensive. The paint had completely burned away, and parts of the metal had actually melted and reformed. But the basic structure remained intact. Rex sat at my feet, no longer agitated but watchful, as if he knew the importance of what we'd found. Using a screwdriver, I carefully pried at the warped edges of the lid. The metal groaned and bent, but gradually gave way. When the lid finally popped open, the smell hit me immediately, a mixture of smoke, melted plastic, and something else I couldn't identify. Inside, protected by what appeared to have been multiple layers of plastic bags, were documents. The outer layers were damaged, edges blackened and brittle, but the inner contents had survived remarkably well. The first thing I pulled out was a manila folder containing what looked like property deeds and surveys. The papers were yellowed with age, dating back nearly 30 years. As I spread them across my kitchen table, a pattern began to emerge that made my stomach clench. These weren't just random property documents. They were detailed surveys and ownership records for every farm in our area, including mine. Someone had been meticulously documenting land ownership, property values, and, most disturbing, what appeared to be planned development projects that had never been publicly announced. But it was the handwritten notes in the margins that really caught my attention. Notes about acquisition targets and resistance factors and timeline acceleration. My farm was circled in red ink with the notation, "Primary obstacle must be resolved." As I continued reading through the documents, a chilling picture emerged. Someone had been planning a massive development project in our area for decades, not the small residential subdivision that had been publicly proposed, but something much larger and more invasive. The papers detailed plans for a major commercial complex, shopping centers, chain restaurants, and even a small airport. The project would require acquiring nearly every farm in a 5-mile radius, including properties that weren't officially for sale. What made my blood run cold were the methods outlined for encouraging reluctant landowners to sell. The notes described a systematic campaign of harassment, property damage, and what could only be called sabotage, designed to make farming unprofitable and dangerous. There were lists of names, farmers who had sold their land in the past 5 years, along with notes about the pressure tactics used to convince them. I recognized several names: the Johnsons, who'd sold after their barn mysteriously burned down; the Millers, who'd given up after their well was contaminated; the Hendersons, who'd sold after old Mr. Henderson's sudden death. My name appeared on a separate list labeled Current Targets. Next to it were detailed notes about my property, my financial situation, and even personal information about my daily routines. Someone had been watching me, studying me, preparing to force me off my land. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the folder was a photograph, a surveillance photo of me and Rex taken from a distance, with a handwritten note that made my hands shake. "Dog presents security risk. Eliminate if necessary." Rex whined softly beside me, as if sensing my distress. The next document in the box was a detailed map of our area with specific properties marked in different colors. Red marks indicated acquired properties. Yellow showed in progress and green marked future targets. My farm was marked in green, but someone had recently drawn a red X over it. Attached to the map was a planning document that made everything clear. The Cornfield fire hadn't been random arson, it had been a test run. The document outlined plans to burn specific buildings on targeted properties, making them uninhabitable and financially devastating to repair. My barn was next on the list. But what shocked me most was the signature at the bottom of several documents: Robert Walsh. Bobby Walsh, the same fire chief who had responded to the Cornfield fire and told me it was likely arson. The man investigating the fires was the one setting them. Everything suddenly made sense. Bobby's quick dismissal of the arson investigation, his casual attitude about the lack of evidence, his detailed knowledge of every farm in the area. He wasn't just covering up the crimes, he was committing them. More documents revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Bobby wasn't working alone. He was part of a group that included local real estate developers, county officials, and even someone from the state environmental agency. They'd been systematically targeting rural properties for years, using a combination of legal pressure, environmental violations, and, when necessary, arson and sabotage. The box contained evidence of at least a dozen suspicious fires over the past 5 years, all investigated by Bobby, all officially ruled as accidents or unsolved arson cases. But the documents showed they were all connected, all part of the same land grab scheme. Rex had somehow known. Dogs have incredible senses of smell and hearing. He must have detected something that night of the fire. Maybe Bobby's scent in places it shouldn't have been. The most chilling document was a recent addition to the file, a veterinary report dated just 2 weeks ago. It was a detailed analysis of Rex's behavior patterns, daily routines, and potential intervention methods. Someone had been watching us closely, documenting Rex's protective instincts and intelligence. The report noted that Border Collies were particularly observant and could potentially identify threats that humans might miss. It recommended neutralizing the animal before proceeding with the next phase of operations. The report was signed by Dr. Martinez. My trusted veterinarian, the woman I'd called that very morning about Rex's strange behavior, was part of the conspiracy. She'd examined Rex not to help him, but to assess whether he posed a threat to their plans. I thought back to her quick diagnosis of anxiety disorder and her recommendation for sedatives. Had she been trying to drug Rex into compliance? The tranquilizer she'd given him had made him sleep for hours when he couldn't alert me to danger. Another document outlined the timeline for my property acquisition. According to their plan, my barn was scheduled to burn within the next week. The fire would be blamed on faulty electrical wiring, and the insurance investigation would be handled by officials who were already bought and paid for. After the barn fire, they expected me to struggle financially with repairs and livestock losses. If I still refused to sell, they had backup plans, contaminating my water supply, reporting false environmental violations, and, if necessary, more fires. The final page was a contract with my name already filled in, offering to buy my property for a fraction of its actual value. All they needed was my signature, or my absence. Rex pressed against my leg, sensing my fear and anger. I realized I was in immediate danger. The documents showed that Bobby Walsh made regular patrols of the area, checking on target properties under the guise of fire prevention inspections. According to the schedule, he was due to visit my farm tomorrow morning. But there was something else, a note indicating that the metal box had been buried as a backup insurance policy by someone within the conspiracy who was having second thoughts. The handwriting was different from the other documents, and the tone suggested fear rather than planning. Someone had been trying to preserve evidence, probably planning to expose the conspiracy eventually. But they'd hidden the evidence in the cornfield, and when Bobby decided to burn the field to destroy it, they'd lost their chance. Except Rex had found it. I needed to get this evidence to someone trustworthy, but the documents made it clear that local law enforcement was compromised. County officials were involved, and I couldn't be sure who else might be part of the conspiracy. My phone rang, making me jump. The caller ID showed Bobby Walsh's number. "Hey there," his familiar voice said when I answered. "Just wanted to check on you after that fire a few weeks back. Thought I'd swing by tomorrow morning, make sure everything's secure on your property." My mouth went dry. "That's not necessary, Bobby. Everything's fine here." "Oh, it's no trouble at all. Part of the job, you know. How about around 9 o'clock? I could hear the false friendliness in his voice, the underlying threat. He wasn't asking, he was telling me he was coming. "Sure," I managed to say. 9 o'clock sounds fine." After hanging up, I looked at Rex, who was watching me with those intelligent brown eyes. "We need help, boy," I whispered. I spent the night copying the most important documents and uploading photos to a secure cloud storage account. If something happened to me, at least the evidence would survive. I also wrote a detailed letter explaining everything I'd discovered, addressing it to the State Attorney General's office. Rex stayed close to me all night, alert and protective. Every sound outside made him lift his head, ears pricked for danger. His earlier agitation made perfect sense now. He'd been trying to warn me about a threat I couldn't see. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I couldn't stay and face Bobby Walsh with only my word against his. The conspiracy was too large, too well connected. I needed to get the evidence to federal authorities who weren't compromised by local corruption. I packed the original documents in a waterproof bag, along with enough supplies for several days. My plan was to drive to the state capital and personally deliver everything to the FBI field office there. It was a 3-hour drive, but it was my only option. Rex seemed to understand we were leaving. He stayed by my side as I loaded my truck, his tail wagging for the first time since this ordeal began. Maybe he sensed that we were finally taking action against the threat he'd been trying to warn me about. At 8:30, I was ready to go. I'd left lights on in the house and my truck parked in its usual spot to make it look like I was home. Rex and I slipped out the back door and made our way through the woods to where I'd hidden my old ATV. We were a quarter mile away when I saw Bobby Walsh's fire department SUV turning into my driveway. We made it to the main road without being spotted, but I knew it wouldn't be long before Bobby realized I wasn't home. The documents had shown how thoroughly they'd been watching me. They'd know my vehicle, my routines, my likely escape routes. I took back roads toward the interstate, Rex sitting alertly in the passenger seat. Every few minutes, I checked my mirrors for signs of pursuit. The morning traffic was light, mostly farmers and commuters heading to work in the county seat. My phone rang repeatedly, Bobby's number, then Dr. Martinez, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail, but the frequency of calls told me they knew I was gone. 20 miles from home, I spotted the first tail, a dark sedan that had been behind me for several miles, maintaining a careful distance. When I took a sudden turn onto a side road, the sedan followed. My heart pounded as I realized the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just about my farm anymore. They were actively hunting me to prevent the evidence from reaching authorities. Rex whined softly, sensing my tension. I reached over to pat his head, grateful for his presence. Without him, I never would have found the buried evidence. I'd have been completely unprepared when they came for my property. The sedan was getting closer. In my rearview mirror, I could see 2 men in the front seat, both wearing dark clothing. They weren't trying to hide their pursuit anymore. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my old truck straining to maintain speed on the winding country roads. The interstate was still 15 miles away, and I wasn't sure we'd make it. The chase lasted another 10 miles before I spotted the state police cruiser at a roadside checkpoint. I'd never been so happy to see law enforcement in my life. I pulled over immediately, the dark sedan disappearing around a bend behind me. The state trooper, Sergeant Williams according to his name tag, listened to my abbreviated story with growing concern. When I showed him some of the key documents, his expression turned grim. "This is way above my pay grade," he said, reaching for his radio. "I'm calling this in to the State Bureau." Within an hour, I was sitting in a secure conference room at the state police headquarters, telling my story to a team of investigators that included FBI agents and state prosecutors. Rex waited in an adjacent room, being treated like the hero he was by officers who understood his role in uncovering the conspiracy. The evidence was even more damning than I'd realized. The documents contained details of similar land grab schemes in 3 other counties, involving millions of dollars in fraudulent property acquisitions and dozens of suspicious fires. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead FBI investigator, explained that they'd been tracking unusual patterns in rural property sales across the region, but hadn't been able to identify the source. My evidence provided the missing pieces they needed. "Your dog may have uncovered one of the largest corruption cases in state history," she told me. "We've been looking for this smoking gun for 2 years." By evening, arrest warrants had been issued for Bobby Walsh, Dr. Martinez, and 6 other conspirators. Federal agents were coordinating simultaneous raids across 3 counties to prevent evidence destruction and ensure no one escaped. I was placed in protective custody until the arrests were complete. The raids were successful. Bobby Walsh was arrested at the fire station, along with evidence of accelerants and detailed plans for burning my barn that very night. Dr. Martinez was taken into custody at her clinic, where agents found files on dozens of farmers and their animals. The conspiracy was even larger than the documents had revealed. Over the past 5 years, the group had illegally acquired more than 30 properties worth millions of dollars. They'd caused countless families to lose their generational farms through intimidation, sabotage, and arson. Rex and I were finally able to return home 3 days later, escorted by federal agents who swept the property for any remaining threats. The old cornfield where Rex had made his discovery was now an official crime scene, with investigators carefully excavating the area for additional evidence. Standing in my kitchen that first night back, I watched Rex eating his dinner with normal enthusiasm for the first time in weeks. He'd saved not just my farm, but potentially dozens of other families from losing their homes and livelihoods. The legal proceedings would take months, but the federal prosecutors were confident they had enough evidence for multiple convictions. Several conspirators had already agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences, providing even more details about the scope of the corruption. My farm was safe. More importantly, the systematic targeting of rural communities had been exposed and stopped. As I sat on my back porch that evening, Rex lying contentedly at my feet, I reflected on how close I'd come to losing everything. Without my Border Collie's incredible instincts and determination, the conspiracy might have succeeded. Sometimes, the best protection comes from the most unexpected sources. Thank you for listening to this incredible true story about Rex and our discovery of corruption in rural Kentucky. It's amazing how our animal companions can sense dangers we completely miss, and how their loyalty can literally save our lives. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories like this one. Your support means everything to me as I continue sharing these remarkable tales. Until next time, remember to trust your instincts, and your dog's instincts too.